Okay, so now in this part of chapter 4, we're learning about cellular respiration. So how do we turn the nutrients, the food that we eat, into ATP? Well, how our cells are doing it. And so we're going to see that there are three main steps of cellular respiration: glycolysis, citric acid cycle, electron transport chain. The word anaerobic means no oxygen is used. But then the other ones say aerobic, there oxygen is necessary. Now this one's just giving an overview, how cellular respiration. We're going to start with glucose. Now our cells can use the other nutrients as well, like fats, proteins. I'm going to show you when those enter into the steps. But we're going to start with the glucose and how glucose gives a lot of energy here. And so cellular respiration needs glucose but also oxygen. Then we're going to see at the end, carbon dioxide is formed, a little bit of water is formed, but more importantly, we make a lot of ATP. Now, some of the energy is lost as heat as well. So that's what that heat, 60%, is about. You don't need to memorize any numbers or anything, but know that these are the products. Okay, in the first step, glycolysis. So here, glucose is split into two. So again, no oxygen is used. Glucose has 6 carbons. When it gets split into two, those two parts are now called pyruvic acids. This is also known as pyruvate. And so now these two parts have 3 carbons each. This step occurs in the cytosol, or you can also say cytoplasm. Cytoplasm meant the inside of the cell. And here, just really only 2 ATPs are made. But the important thing for the steps of cellular respiration is what is being produced at the end. So know that glycolysis makes NADH, just a little bit of ATP, only 2, and 2 molecules of pyruvic acid. And again, the other word for that is pyruvate. Okay, so do not worry about this picture, but this is just an overview just to show you what happens. Glucose gets split into 2. And then hydrogens are taken away from those 2 parts and given to this. It's called NAD. This is actually vitamin B3. I'm not going to ask you that specifically, but it's just kind of interesting. So we're going to see that in this step, in the next step, and the one after that, NAD is going to be involved. So here, NAD takes away hydrogens from the 2 molecules and then turns itself to NADH. And again, in the process, ATP is being made. Right, let's go to the next step. If there is oxygen, then the pyruvic acid goes to the next steps, enters the next steps. If there is no oxygen, we're going to see that pyruvic acid is going to remain over there. It's not going to go into the mitochondria. It's going to then get converted to lactic acid. Okay, but if there is oxygen, then we can go into the next steps. And so with these steps, aerobic reactions, we're going to see acetyl-CoA being made first, citric acid cycle, and then electron transport chain. Okay, and so then these next 2 steps occur in the mitochondria. Now let's look at what is happening. So now this is the second step, the citric acid cycle. So here, that pyruvate that we made from glycolysis, so now it gets converted to this other molecule called acetyl-CoA. Then this acetyl-CoA enters a cycle. So now it goes through these changes, it turns into these different molecules. But what is important here is more NADH is being produced because hydrogens are taken away. A little bit of ATP is being made. And here's another molecule that also takes away hydrogens, FAD. And FAD is vitamin B2. And so here, vitamin B3, the NAD, vitamin B2 are taking away the hydrogens. And at the end of the citric acid cycle, again, a little bit of ATP is produced. So now it's saying for each citric acid cycle, which ends up being, and that's going to be 2 because there are 2 of these. But no, a little bit of ATP. Hydrogens are transferred to NAD and FAD, and so this ends up making NADH and also FADH2 are produced. So that's what this means. And also during the step, CO2 is produced. Okay, so now there are all these NADHs, FADH2s that are being made. So what's going to happen to them? So now we're going to go on to the next step. In the next step is called the electron transport chain. This also occurs in the mitochondria. NADH and FADH2, these are bringing their hydrogens. And they bring their hydrogens to these special proteins that are located in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. And so we're going to see that the energy from these hydrogens and the hydrogen's electrons are transferred, and they're going to help to make ATP. Okay, so let's see how this is happening. All right, so in this picture, this is the mitochondria, but the mitochondria has two membranes. So think like two layers of covering. And so it's saying the outer membrane, and then this is the inner membrane. And so in this inner layer covering, there are these special proteins. Okay, so inside the mitochondria, NADH is here, FADH2 is here. These are giving up their hydrogens. When they give up their hydrogens are passed to the side. So now you have a high concentration of hydrogen here. Okay, but low concentration of hydrogen on the inside. Okay. This last protein here called ATP synthase, this is the important one. When the hydrogens, and only through this is how the hydrogens are able to pass to the inner part, only through this, when they pass through, this powers this protein. This protein kind of acts like a turbine. Think like a water turbine. When the hydrogens pass through it with so much force, because there's so much on that side, high on that side, when they pass through it, it powers this ATP synthase protein, and the ATP synthase makes ATP. And that's basically the main thing. That's how we get all this ATP. Now, where does oxygen play into this? Where does it come in? So think you always want a high level on the outside and low on the inner part. So that's what oxygen is doing. Oxygen grabs on to the hydrogens that are here and turns itself to H2O. So it's basically taking up these hydrogens and getting rid of them. And then H2O, of course, then you use it in your cells. And also oxygen is taking up the electrons of those hydrogen atoms. And so you can see one electron, the electrons are being transferred. Okay, so without oxygen, then the hydrogen concentration gradient would not be established. And so without that gradient of high to low, if there wasn't a high to low difference, then the ATP synthase wouldn't do anything. And so that's what happens if oxygen levels get low, then this just doesn't run anymore. Okay, so let's go to the next slide here. And so this is talking about that special protein, ATP synthase. And so this is the one when the hydrogens, and also they say protons for hydrogens, because a hydrogen atom only has one proton, so they thought proton hydrogen. And so hydrogens move through this special protein, this channel protein, and it has to be high to low concentration, and it powers this protein. And so you can see it making ATP there. So I just wanted to give just an overview. We'll do summary here for the steps. The first step was called glycolysis. This occurs in the cytoplasm or the cytosol. This produces a little bit of ATP, only about 2. It makes NADH, and it also makes 2 pyruvates. Then the next one, citric acid cycle. Oops, sorry. This one occurs in the mitochondria, not in that membrane part, but the inner part. It occurs in the mitochondria. This also makes a little bit of ATP, again, not much, this 2. It makes some CO2. Also, we get NADH and FADH2. And the last step, the electron transport. Know that this also occurs in the mitochondria. And here, the NADH and FADH2, sorry, cannot write. Know that those two bring over hydrogens. And then know that hydrogens pass through that special protein called the ATP synthase. And this ends up making many ATP molecules. Know that this step makes the most compared to the other 2 steps. And so you'll see like different numbers in the different books, textbooks. Some say 26, some say 30. Now those numbers depend on if things go according to plan, if nothing goes wrong. And so don't worry about the numbers too much. Just know that this last step, electron transport, makes the most. Oh, but also you have to have oxygen. And also the citric acid cycle cannot run without oxygen either. So really both of these, oxygen is required. Right. So again, in the presence of oxygen, NADH, the hydrogens, they can go to that inner membrane of the mitochondria. But if there's no oxygen, well, if there's no oxygen, then you end up accumulating those hydrogens. There's nothing to take them away. So this is what happens in our muscles when we're exercising. You know how you run out of breath, you just don't have any as much. Well, when you run out of oxygen, then that pyruvic acid or the pyruvates from the first step, they get converted to lactic acid. Okay, so this is if no oxygen. So what's happening is only the first step, only glycolysis occurs, but then the other 2 steps don't occur. And if you remember, glycolysis does make a little bit of ATP, but not as much. And so you're also not feeling as energetic, compared to the first when you're exercising. But know that lactic acid forms if there's no oxygen, and lactic acid makes our muscles burn when we're exercising. Okay, so different nutrients can enter into these steps, and then what this is saying is if you're not burning what you eat, then too much is going to get converted. So too much glucose can get converted to glycogen. Glycogen is just many glucose molecules together, and they can also get converted to fats. That can also happen.